Developers go crazy when these things happen, and they're like, what the hell, I just copied an object and then we have a repository that's called JS Beginners Workspace. As you can see, we have arrays, conditional, functions, strings, variables. These are the things that we have already discussed. The next of the things that we are going to discuss today are going to be a bit different. For instance, today we are going to talk about JavaScript objects. So how do we work with JavaScript objects in general, in which we are going to be opening our JS Beginners Workspace. So that's this one. We should be able to get this going. All right. Today we are going to talk about JavaScript objects. So let's create a new folder and call this JavaScript objects or JS object. For the ease of usage, I'm gonna just copy these two files from JS strings to JavaScript object folder. So we have an index.html inside this folder and a JavaScript file, and then we also have this heading that is JS string. So I'm gonna change that to JS objects. I'm gonna also change the title of this one to JS objects. Now that we have this one, let's actually open this into a browser. So I'm gonna open this into an explorer, and what I can do here is that I can just right click on this HTML and then open it in the browser. So once I open this in the browser, so this is what we have. We have this JS objects text and nothing else. There's no JavaScript executed at the moment because our JavaScript file, which is the main JS, is absolutely empty. So first of all, when we talk about objects, we have to first understand, hey, what is an object? So I'm gonna go to my Miro. So when we talk about objects in JavaScript, objects are things that you can see, that you can think about as entities that exist. For instance, this book, this is an object, right? If I show you this really nice cupcake, every one of this cupcake is an object. This cupcake's box is an object. This cup is an object. My glasses are an object. So everything that you can imagine in real life is an object essentially. When we talk about objects in programming, we talk about objects that are a part of our application. For instance, imagine that you have Facebook, right? So for Facebook, every user is an object. Every picture that you upload is an object. Every post that you do is an object. For this example, what we're going to talk about is something that, let's assume we have an application that has an author, let's say, and each author could have multiple books. So let's say this is the application header. We could have something like a profile picture here. Let's say just for the sake of imagining this, let's say my name is CodeWithAhsan, so we have my initials here, and then essentially let's say this application or this imaginary application that we have would have something like, hey, we have Angular cookbook, and then similarly we could have multiple books for this particular author, right? So let's say this is Angular cookbook v2, then this is Angular cookbook v3, then let's say we have another book that is focused on, let's say, Mernsack crash course. All right, so if these are some books by this author, which is me myself, then imagine that these are some cards that you show on the UI for these books. Similarly, we could have something of the sort of, let's say, an input box. So let's say here you might want to say something like search, and if that's the case, then this is essentially a search input, and you could search one of those books. So in this imaginary application, we have essentially two kind of objects. One is this user itself, and the second one is the book that a user could have, and we are calling this user an author, right? So let's say we have a car here, and this car essentially is something like that. Now if this car is an object, and we are also gonna say book, so let's say we have a book, and this book is gonna be something like this, and let's say instead of car we could have person, so a person would be something like this. So let's say, just for the sake of example, what can a car have as its properties? So each object in JavaScript, or even in most programming language, has two major parts. An object has two things. One, we call it properties, and second is methods, or we call it functionality. So an object basically has two things, properties and methods. Now let's talk about this car object. What properties do you think this car could have? Let's say if it's a car, then you might have a property that is something like this car's model, all right? Yeah, or we could also call it make. For instance, this is Toyota. Then we could have model, let's say this is 2010 or 2016. Then we could have a property that says color. Color could be, let's say, gunmetallic, which is one of my favorite colors for cars. Then it could also have something like number of doors, let's say 4. So these are some of the properties that this car could have. Now if we talk about methods, what methods could have, or license plate, a good good one. It could also have a license plate or license number, so to say. So let's say A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. Or similarly, if we talk about methods, methods define what this car can do. So it's not about the car's qualities, it's about the car's functionalities. So a car has two things, as I said, properties and methods. Properties define certain aspects of the car: the color, the make, the model, dimensions, how wide it is, how long the car is. But when we come to methods, methods are what the car can do. For instance, you could start a car, you could stop a car, you could apply brakes to a car. Let's say you could just ring the horn of the car. You could also indicate, let's say, turn on the lights or turn on the headlights. Then you could have turn off lights. So these are some methods that this car could have. So when we talk about objects in general, these are the two things that we can talk about. A car could have these things, right? Similarly, if we talk about this user, what property, or this author, what properties do we think this author could have? So if we talk about that, this user or this author could have, let's say, the user's name or the author name, let's say Muhammad Ahsan. Similarly, this could have the author's age, let's say 30 for now. Then this user could also have other things like, technologies, or let's say designation, which I can say software architect. Similarly, this user could have residence, let's say, where the author lives. So I'm gonna type Sweden here. Similarly, the user could have multiple other properties as well. The user could have, let's say, email, which could be a string. Then we have password, which could be a string. Then we can have multiple other things as well. So for instance, if the user has to use this application, the user absolutely has to log in into the application. So we could have something like login as a method, log out as a method. Similarly, we could have something like, let's say, if this user is also able to create a post, and this plus button is essentially something that you can use to create a post, let's say. So if this plus button is supposed to help you create a post, then that means that you have a list of posts as well. So you could create a post. Similarly, the user could have a function that says create a post, delete a post by post ID. Let's say we have delete post, create post, update post, and that's it. All right. So now that we have these things configured, we now understand, hey, this is how this whole scenario looks for an author. What about a book in this case? In this case, a book could have certain properties, but let's say not a function assigned to it. So a book could have something like the book title. All right. Let's say Angular Cookbook. Release date. This could be something like, September or August 2021. So similarly, every object has two kind of things. We also have publisher, exactly. Let's say packed, and then we have author, and the author name could reside here. So this is how a book looks like. Now we understand that, hey, an object has a property and an object has a method. So how do we actually start coding this whole situation inside the code itself? So for that, we are gonna start working on our main JavaScript file, and we are going to see what we get out when we log something. So first of all, what we want to do is we want to create, let's say, an author object. So to create an object, what you would do, or let's try the car object. So we can say const car equals, and then here we start this with curly braces. So what these curly braces represent is, this is something that we call object literal. All right, and this is important to understand. This is called object literal. This is one way of creating an object. There are other ways of creating objects as well. So this object literal means that we start with a curly bracket, we end with a curly bracket, and then we also have properties in it. So each property, just like we have this make Toyota model 2016, for each of these properties, what you have is you start the property name with a small letter. So you say something like make. Now this make is something that we call a key. So in each object we have a key and we have a value. So this make is essentially Toyota. As you know that the values that we have for each variable is either a string, a number, an array, an object, null, undefined, false, true. So here when we have to use this string Toyota, we use quotation marks and we use the string here. Now you can see that here we have the car, we have the make Toyota. Similarly, we can create other properties like model, and the model could be 2016. Similarly, and 2016 is a number, so we don't need to create a string for it since it's a number. Similarly, we have color, so we could say color. Here we could say gun metallic. Similarly, we have number of doors, so we can say number of doors, and here we have 2. since it's a number, and then we have a license number, and since the license number contains alphabets as well as numbers, we are going to take a string for this, so we can say ABC123. Now you can see that we have this car object created. Again, I'm going to repeat that here in this object we have key value pairs. This is a key value pair, this is a key value pair, this is a key value pair. So we have about 5 key value pairs where the left hand side is always a key and the right hand side is the value of this key. So we are saying, hey, this car's make is Toyota, this car's model is 2016. We could also have another car, let's say the same car but let's say a Honda car. Similarly, it could be like 2012, the color could be red, number of doors could be 4, and this license number could be something else. Okay, so we have now 2 car objects, car and car2, let's say. So this is how you would create an object in JavaScript. Now if we have to talk about how to access this property, for instance, if you just wanted to know, hey, what is the color of this car or car1, so in the code we can see it, but later when the code runs, if we want to check, hey, give me the color of car1, the way you would do it, you would do it console.log, and here we can access this particular value, which is the color, in 2 ways. One, using the dot notation, and second, using the associative array style. So here we can say car1 dot, and here we can say color, and when we do this we should be console logging the values. You can see that we get the value gun metallic here, and the gun metallic is coming from line number 18, which is here. So if I refresh now, you can see that car1 is an object. This object has these key value pairs, as you can see, as we set in the code. This object is obviously of the type object, and car1 dot color is gun metallic, so we are using dot color, and that's how we get back the value of the object itself. Similarly, if I had to do for car2, I would just say car2, and this would exactly be the same. Now we have car2 which has a color red, so when we do console log of car2.color, what we get out is the color red. So this is the first way of accessing an object's property. The second way of accessing a property of an object is using this index or this array notation, so to say, and we call this the associative array notation. So here, instead of using the dot color, we use this bracket, and then in form of a string we pass this color. So you can see here we are saying car2, but then for the index we are using color. All right, now if I refresh this, you will see that the car2 is again the car2, but when we log this, we exactly get the color red. Now you might be asking, hey, how is that possible? So imagine that let's say we have an array of fruits, and here we have something called apple, we have mango and grapes as a string, and if we wanted to console.log fruits as well, this is what you would see on screen. So let's go back here, refresh, and now if you have a look at this object, which is an array, you see this, and if I log something that is a car1, see what we get. We get this. Now if you look closely at both of these things, you will find something in common. The common thing here is that in this array you will see on the left side the key is 0, the value is apple, but in this object here the key is color and the value is a string. So here in an array, the scenario is that the keys are always numeric and they are auto incremented. So you will start with a 0, then 1, then 2, and then you'll go on from there, right? But in a particular scenario where you are using an object, in the objects you will always find that the keys are whatever you provide as a key here. So it's not numbers, it's different scenario right there. All right, do you get the idea behind how the object and the arrays are similar? In an array the keys are 0, 1, 2, but in an object the same index or the same keys are color, license number, make, model. So when I can access an array by doing things like fruits 0, which means that I'm trying to use the key 0, which is this one, and then I'm getting the first value which is assigned to this key. Similarly, when I try to do car1 and here I say color, you do the exact same thing. So when we say color here, we're kind of referring to the key here. Similarly, I could say something like license plate, license number, and you will see that the output would be the value of the license number. So we are accessing this object in kind of a way that we access an array, but this is called an associative array, and you will find this into multiple websites as well, where we call objects sort of an associative array, because we have it similar to an array, but the keys are actually string values. The keys here are not numbers, but here the keys are a string value. So you just learned two ways of accessing a property of an object. First one is you do dot notation with the color, and the second one is that you do this in the associative array manner, which is something like this, and you get the exact same thing. This is really helpful when you don't have this string available right away, but you have this in a variable. So let's say if I had this key here in a variable that says color console.log, and here I can say something like car1, and here I can say key. Now why this is important and this is interesting, because now that we have this information, we can actually use this variable as the index here. If I do something like car1.key here, now this will mean that car1 has a property that is called key. This will not use this variable as an index, because this key means we are trying to access a property that is with the name key inside this car2 or car1. But when we use a variable like this variable is substituted with this value just like this, and then the result comes out. So if I save this, if we go here, refresh, you will see that we get the value absolutely correctly. So if I just put a breakpoint here, refresh, you will see that here we don't have the key assigned at the moment, but if we go forward, the value of the key is color, and now we are saying, hey, car1, and then the index or the key is color. So if I just hover off key, you can see that this is color, and now this is trying to access car1.key or car1 key. All right, so you could say that array is sort of an object, and when you do type of array, for instance, when you do car1, you can see that it kind of comes out of the object. If I do car1, if I kind of go into a bit more complexity, you will see that this car1, if I open this, you will see that the prototype of this car is an object. Similarly, if I check fruits, which is an array, if I open this, you see that it says array here, but if I open this prototype and go downwards, you will see that we see object. So array is something that is inheriting or is extended from an object. So it's an object, but a special kind of object that we call an array, right? But behind the scenes, everything in JavaScript that you will find is essentially an object. All right, now that we understand this, let's talk about something else. What if I needed to change the color of this car too? If it's red, what if I needed to change it to blue? So in order to do so as well, I'm gonna just remove this here. But if I needed to change the color of car2, then I would do something like car2.color equals blue, and when we console log it, we will see that here the color of car2 now becomes, we are logging car1, sorry. So this is going to be car2, and now if I go here and refresh, you should be able to see that we have the color of the car2 as blue. Now if we go back to the code, another way of changing a color would be something like this, car2, and then using the associative array notation, color equals purple. So now at this point, this will change the color to blue, but in the very next line, it will change this to purple, and when we console log it, the value of car2 color should be purple. So when we test this and refresh this, you will see that the color right now is purple. How do we check this out? We put breakpoints, we refresh. At this point, the car2 color is red, which is the original color coming from here. When we go over this line, this value changes the car2 color to blue because we have set this here. And when we go over this line, then it will change the same color to purple. So now the car2 color becomes purple. So these are the two ways that you could use. When we have a constant and we have a primitive value, then we can not change it or reassign this. For instance, if we have a const number 1 equals 2 and then we do number 1 equals to 5, this will throw us an error, and we will see the error here. You can see that assignment to constant variable. So we cannot reassign a number. All right. Similarly, if this was a string, let's say string, and we do this like 2, and then we assign this string to something like 5, this will also not work. So you see that this cannot be reassigned. But when we talk about objects, we are not reassigning the whole object. What we are doing here is that we are only reassigning a property value, and this is what you have to be careful about when working with JavaScript. So this car2 is a constant, but that does not mean that every property in this whole object is constant as well. This only means this car2 variable is constant, and this is going to be confusing, but this will be more clear as we go forward in this session. So here I cannot do something like car2 equals an object that only has a property, or let's say if I wanted to do something like, so if I wanted to do something like this using the same values but then reassigning it using the equal sign, this will give us an error because we cannot reassign the whole object. We cannot use the equal sign with this car2 variable because this is declared and assigned once already. But when we talk about an object, that is completely possible. Similarly, if we create a fruits array, we cannot say here, hey, fruits equals to now just one element because I love mangoes only, so I'm gonna just keep mangoes. If we do this, we are gonna end up with an error. But even with this whole scenario, I could add stuff to this fruits array. So that means I could choose something like fruits.push, and then here I could add a new item. We already have mango. What do you want to add? Let's add something like strawberry. So strawberry. So if I do this, then that means that this fruits now has strawberry as well. So we can change an array, but we cannot reassign it. So you cannot reassign a variable. All right. So hope this makes sense. Now that we have this information, let's go back to the original problem that we discussed. Let's say if we had authors, which is this guy here, which has a name, age, designation, blah, blah, blah. If this guy has all these properties, then how would this guy look in this whole scenario? So I'm going to comment all these things out, but I'm going to keep this for you to check later on. But let's say if we have an author, we're going to say something like author. Let's call this author1 because we are going to have more authors going forward, and this author has some properties. This has a name, age, designation, residence, email, password. So let's add those. Name, then we have age. Let's say the age is 30. Then we have residence, let's say Sweden. Then we have designation, which is software architect, and we also have the email. Let's say something like abc@xyz.com, and then we have something like password. So let's say 1234, the safest password on earth. And now that we have all these things, let's talk about visiting this user or watching this user. So if I do console log author1 actually, you will see that here when we refresh, we should be able to log this user. So we have this author, again same properties. All right, now that we know how to access this user, one more thing that we would want to do is in a particular object we could also have other objects or other arrays as well. For instance, this residence could be an object in which we could have nested properties. So instead of having just this string, we could have something like this, and then we could have something like address. Let's say I call this Rosunda. City, so city could be Stockholm. Then we have country, and now this is Sweden. So we could have each property as an object as well. So we could have nested properties. We could have nested properties within properties. So we have an object within an object. We have a residence, we have address, city, country. Similarly, we could have arrays within object properties. So let's say if this author has book, that would be something like this. So we would have a book, and then we would have Angular, cookbook, and then we would have something like Mund, stack, crash, course. So let's say this author has 2 books. Now if I try to log this, you will see that we have a book, which is an array. So if I open this, you can see this is an array of 2 elements. At 0 index, we have Angular cookbook. At 1 index, we have the Mund stack crash course. Similarly, if I look at residence, this is an object. So the topmost object is expanded and we have some properties, but then residence is also an object which has these keys. So if I have to access this country property, how would I do it? I would do author1 dot residence, which is this object. So this is the residence object, and then I have to do another dot. So I will do dot, and then I will say country, and that's how I get this exact property. So if you have nested properties, that is how you would get it. Similarly, if I had to get this second book, how can I get it? I can do something like author1 dot books, and then for the index, I can use the index 1, which is the second index. So we start with 0 and then we go towards 1. So we have Mund stack crash course at index 1, which is this one. So that's how you would access different things, right? Now let's talk about other things, which is how do we create these methods within the object. So methods are essentially functions. For instance, you could have something called a function here that you would say log or called greeting, and here you would say something like console.log hello Salman. So if this was a function, I could easily go and call it here something like console.log greeting, and then this this calling notation, which is these two parameters. So once I do this, you will see that on refreshing it says hello Salman. Why? Because it comes inside this function when this line is executed. So if I refresh, it's on this line, it goes inside the function, comes at this point and logs hello Salman. Alright, so you see how the functions work. But this function is not a method of this author. This is just a function outside this object, so they don't have a link together. So here, to create a function, we do the exact same thing. We create a property name, let's say greeting, and here then after this colon, so for a function all we do is we do either this function, but instead of doing this we can also use the new syntax of JavaScript, which is something like this. So we have this greeting method here, which means this is a function, and here I could say something like console.log. Here I could say hello Ahsan Ayaz. Now in order to call this function, similar to how we access a property within an object using the dot notation, similarly here we could do exactly the same thing. We could say author1 dot, and here you can see we have a listing of this greeting method. See how VS Code separates out properties with functions. Each property that you see is in this blue color box, but each function that you see is with this purple box. So this is a function, and now you need to call this function, and once you do, it should log this hello Ahsan Ayaz. I'm gonna get rid of this function so we know that this is the exact function being called. So here if I refresh now, you see that it comes inside this function because it comes here. So if I refresh now, you see that author1 has this greeting that is a function. This F actually notates that this is a function, and this function is greeting. So this goes inside the greeting function and then it logs hello Ahsan Ayaz. Alright, now one interesting thing is that as we talked about greeting, we also talked about other functions like login, and we also talked about something like logout. Alright, similarly we had other functions that we called, and we had them, and you can see that each property that we declare, for each new property we have to use this comma. So we have key, value, and then we have a comma, and then we have the new key, new value. Similarly for the functions, we have this notation where we just use this function notation, but for each new one we have to separate it with a comma. So here we have login, and we are just going to log here something like, hey, we could say author logged in. Similarly here we could say something like author logged out. All right, what else did we discuss about the function? So we have create post, delete post, update post. So we can also do something like this. So we have something like create post, and then we have delete post, and then we have update post. So in these also we could have some sort of console logs here, and now we can call it post created. I'm going to copy this, paste it here, we will call it deleted, we'll call it updated. Now that we have all these functions, we can actually use them within our console. So if I go here back to my console and refresh, you will see that we have this author1 object, and this author1 has a couple of properties but a lot of functions as well. We have a create post function, delete post, we have greeting, login, logout, and we can easily call all these functions similar to like author1.greeting and calling it just like this. You see it says hello Ahsan Ayaz, then we have delete post, post deleted. Similarly if we do a login, you can see that something is happening inside logging. Right now we are only doing a console log, but obviously you can do much better than that. So now that we have these functions created, there's one more thing that is really interesting that you need to learn. What if I wanted to log also the actual name in the greeting message, which means that I would have to access this name property within the functions themselves. If we use the notation this dot, then we get access to all the properties. So here in the greeting message I could do something like this dot, and here I can use the name property, which means I'm logging here now this dot name. So if I save this, go back to my browser, refresh, and if I do something like author1 dot greeting, here you will see that now it says Muhammad Ahsan Ayaz. It is now using the name property. If we put a breakpoint here, you will see that when it comes in the greeting function, this dot name evaluates to Muhammad Ahsan Ayaz, which is exactly this. Now can we say hello Muhammad Ahsan Ayaz? Yes, we can. We can use a template literal here, and here we can say something like hello, and here we can use the interpolation and we can say dollar and then these brackets, and inside we can use this dot name. Now this will combine the value of this dot name into this string and then will output something like hello Muhammad Ahsan Ayaz. Once we go forward, you will see the whole message that says hello Muhammad Ahsan Ayaz. So now you understand how we can access the value of one thing into another. Now what's beautiful is that not only you can access this name property, you can also access other properties as well. But what if we wanted to greet our user as soon as the user logs in? In that particular case, you would want to call this greeting method whenever the user logs in. So here, just after this console log, you could do something like this dot greeting, which means that now first it's going to log the user logged in or auth logged in, but then also it's going to call greeting, which will essentially call the name of the user. So here, if I refresh now, you will see that it comes inside the greeting. Actually, let me remove one line here. So this is the one. So if I go back to my code here, now when we refresh, we just log this information. But let's say the user logs in now. So we say author one.login. And now it will also console log, and it will then also greet the user using the username. So if I do this, you see that author logged in and hello Mohammad Ahsan. So now you see how this programming is magically doing things that we want to do in the real applications. And this is absolutely amazing, right? So far so good. I think you now understand what we are talking about. One of the things that you need to understand about objects versus normal variables or primitives is the concept of stack and heap. So let's say we have these two boxes here. Whenever we declare a particular variable in the stack, so stack is like a basket, right? So let's say if you have a basket of clothes, you will put a cloth inside a basket, then you will throw another cloth inside, and then it will be on top of the previous cloth. Similarly, like a stack of plates when you're in the kitchen, so you have one plate on top of another, and that creates a stack of plates. Heap is a bit different, but let's talk about stack first. Let's assume that this stack is divided into two things. One is, let's say we have a variable that we call counter value. Okay, so this counter value, if it's let's say 10 or 100, then that means this variable in JavaScript is actually declared here. So this counter variable is actually here, and then we have the value of it, and the value of it is 100. So let's say we also have its value, and this value is set to 100. This is what happens when you create a variable. Similarly, let's say we have a variable that says, let's say favorite color. Let's say if it's, so we have another variable that is called favorite color. So that favorite color is essentially created here, and we have this counter value. And then let's suppose we have essentially something like this. All right, so we have a box here. Similarly, we have a box for fav color. Similarly, we could have further boxes as well in this stack. And I also have a video on stack. If you can watch it on YouTube, that would be nice as well. All right, so let's say we have this stack where we can keep values of the variables. This fav color value is purple, so I'm going to create another text here, and this text is going to contain the value purple, which is here. Now in the case of primitives, and when I say primitives, I'm talking about numbers, strings, booleans. You could also have, let's say, a constant that says, for instance, is Muslim. So if it's for me, that's true. So if I go here and then I kind of paste it a text here, and then I go here, so let's say if I put it here, the value would be, this is what we have here. So in case of primitives, this is what you have. You have all the values going into JavaScript stack, which is a memory, and in this memory we have the values against the objects. All right, let's say we have a counter value and we don't make it we make it not a const but a let. All right, so if we have this set to 100, and then we have another variable, let's say we have also an object that is const basket, let's say basket1, and then this basket has items set to 10, which means it has 10 items, and then it also has a color, and the color is, let's say, black. All right, so this is a basket. When we create an object, this object does not end up in stack just like this. Its value ends up in heap. So in the heap we have different locations. It is not like a stack. So here we have something like this. So this item is actually let's say somewhere around here. Now when we create this variable, this basket1 variable is going to be created. Its variable will be here. The value of this variable is not going to be a concrete value. The value of this basket would be sort of a pointer. So you could call it pointer, you could call it reference, let's say reference. And this reference is of the object in the heap. So this kind of goes here, and then it refers this heap value. The value is itself, it's not in the stack. And this is particularly for objects. This is a really important concept to understand if you are working with JavaScript. Let's say if I had this counter value 1, and now I also have to create another variable, which is, let's say, counter value 2. So let's say if I also create a new variable and I do something like counter value 2 equals 200. All right, or not 200, but I assign this to counter value, or let's call it counter value 1. So now you will see that the value of counter value 2 itself, what would it be? If I log this down, you will see that counter value 2 is exactly the same as counter value 1. How do we know? So if I refresh this, so for primitives, you will see that the counter value is 100. The counter value 2, we are assigning it to the value of counter value 1, which is 100. So what this will do is that this will make the value same as counter value 1, 100, 100. Now if we see the value of counter value 2, this is also 100. Now if I go here and show you in the stack, what this does is that this creates another variable, which is counter value 2, and it creates another value which is 100. So it's kind of similar to what we do. Now you might be asking, hey, okay, what is the difference here? Well, the difference here is that if I go in this line and if I say counter value 2 equals, let's say, minus 50. In this case, when I refresh this application and if we go towards the value at the very end, you will see that the counter value 1 is 100. Is it still 100? And the counter value 2 is now minus 50. So initially we assigned both these values to 100 by doing this, which means that we said, hey, counter value 2 is equal to counter value 1. But what that did is it essentially copied this value. But then when we changed that later on, it only came here and changed this value to minus 50. But then it did not change this value because these two are different entries in the stack. Let's say if we do the same thing with basket, all right? So if we go here and create a new basket and we say the basket 2 equals basket 1, all right? And now if I go ahead and change the value of basket 2, I'm not changing basket 1, I'm changing basket 2. So basket 2 dot color, I'm saying that the basket 2 dot color is going to be purple, which means that ideally basket 1 should still be the same, but basket 2 color should be changed. So if I do this and go back to my code, refresh, and now if I check basket 1, you see basket 1 color also has changed as well as basket 2. So basket 1 also changed and basket 2 also changed. This is a really important concept to understand when it comes to values versus reference. So when we create an object, it creates it in the heap. When we duplicate that object and when we say here that basket 2 is equal to basket 1, it's not copying the value, but what it does is that it creates a new variable in the stack by the name of basket 2. But what it does is that it points the same reference to the same object, but with basket 2. So essentially it does this. So I hope this makes sense. Kind of the same thing. So if I do this, when you create basket 2, what it does is that it kind of creates something like this. So basket 2 is gonna use the same reference, which is referencing the same thing. So now if you change anything within the JavaScript object of this basket 2, you are actually changing the object for basket 1 as well. Similarly, if you change, let's say if you don't change basket 2, but if you change basket 1 and you change the items to, let's say, a 20,000, that also means that when we are going to check basket 1 and basket 2, both of them would have the items changed. So now they are referencing each other. This is a really important concept to understand when we talk about objects and numbers, because developers go crazy when these things happen and they're like, what the hell, I just copied an object and then I don't know why it's changing the original object, why the original object is changing, I'm just changing a new object. Really important pain point when it comes to talking about different objects in JavaScript. And this is quite the same when it comes to arrays as well. So if you had an array of fruits, and if you say something like you have fruits, let's say const fruits 2 equals fruits 1, and here then you push something to fruits 2, let's say. So we are not pushing to fruits, but we are pushing to fruits 2. And when we refresh, if we check now the fruits 2, you see that in the fruits 2 we push strawberry, but if we check fruits, you also see that the fruits array has also been changed. So the original array changed and the new copied array also changed. So this is a really important concept to understand. Everyone with me so far? Do you think this is helpful? Do you think this is important knowledge? Are you following me, folks? Just looking for some comments in the chat. Yes, precise. Array also taking reference. Yes, Raja, array also takes references because array is behind the scenes also an object, or you could say array is not a primitive. So we have a list of JavaScript primitive variables. So if you do JavaScript primitive types, you will see that it has a number of things. So for JavaScript primitives, you have a string, you have a number, you have a big int, you have a boolean and a symbol. All right, only these values are primitives. Objects, arrays, they are not primitives. All right, this would also potentially be the same for functions. Even if you generate functions, I'm pretty sure that it's exactly the same. If you change a function and kind of assign the function to another one, then all of the references would be changed, or all of the pointers would reference to the new value. Exactly. All right, so now that we have this, I'm just gonna take a 3 minutes break. So I'm gonna come back, and it's time for Maghrib as well. That sounds good. All right, so I'm gonna let this sink in for you folks, and I'm gonna be coming back in 3 minutes. Give me 3 minutes. I'm gonna just fill out this almost empty bottle of mine, so I got a drink, and then I'm gonna be taking some questions, and then we are going to wrap this up. So just give me 3 minutes. Abdul Rahman Khan says, yes sir, it's good knowledge, thank you, I highly appreciate your input. So be right back. Right, everyone, back. Okay, let's see. All right, so we talked about objects and we talked about some other stuff as well. I'm going to push this code for you while I'm getting more questions. So we have git status, yeah, now we have this git commit m, and then we have JS objects. JavaScript objects is something that is really interesting for me, to be honest. And we have classes that we can use to create different instances of objects. This is something that I'm gonna look into more in the coming days. So the code is pushed as well. All right, I hope that you liked the video. If you did, press the thumbs up button and also subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support my channel, you can support me on Patreon for as low as $5 a month. That really supports the channel grow. And I'm gonna see you in this next video. Till then, happy coding.